We'll call the meeting to order. Give us the thumbs up. We're ready to go. Okay, good. Good afternoon. Thanks so much, Governance Committee, for coming together to discuss the bylaws today. Would like to do a roll call just to confirm quorum. Mary Beth Cody.
Present.
Ryan Over.
Present.
Kirk Hale.
Present.
And Sandy Mathis is absent, so we have a quorum of the committee, therefore we can conduct business. This meeting was noticed in accordance with open meetings laws. We have our live streaming firm, Acquisitions Marketing, live streaming for us today. And the purpose of the meeting is simply to discuss the Governance Committee's proposed recommendations to edit the bylaws. So, quick synopsis, and I would love to hand it over to Mary Beth to give more perspective. But the bylaws that we currently have are reflective of an organization that is not firmly has its feet set in the quasi public authority world. We think the bylaws that were crafted are more deliberate in process and structure and efficiency, and I think also allows us to have some innovation and collaboration at a board level. So over the last week, we sent you a red line version of the bylaws. We have a clean version in the packet as well. And I also sent an email that outlines the key changes with respect to the bylaws. So again, we think this document is more of a living, breathing, flexible document. And if this committee is comfortable at the end of our discussion today, the goal would be for the Governance Committee to recommend these new bylaws to the full board at the May 20th meeting. So with that, we'd love to hand it over to Mary Beth just to give a high-level review over some of the key changes.
I believe we had asked our legal counsel to look at our bylaws and kind of help us update it for the switch from a nonprofit to being regulated by the ABO. So they did that. In doing that, I think that what they were trying to capture a bunch of different concepts. I think they used some materials that they may have used for other similar organizations. And in doing so, there was some duplication, some replicated sections in the document that we got, and there also was a little less straightforward with respect to like membership categories and things like that. So a lot of the changes to the document that we started with had to do with clarifying what are voting members, what are directors, what's the leadership, what's the role of leadership, what's the relationship to the president and CEO. So the document we had appeared to have created a class of voting members that were separate from directors who were separate from officers, and that's just not the case for us. We have one class of directors, right, who are the board of directors, and then we have investors. So we made that very clear. I had some previous experience with a board where there were people who were investors, and we actually had an investor come and say, what is the return on my investment? As though there was some kind of a expectation that there would be a financial or a transactional relationship there. And so we added a statement to make sure it's very clear when you're an investor, you're essentially a supporter, right? Made that very clear. One of the things that we really didn't have a good method in the new organization, there was sort of the old organization. The new organization was nominations and appointments and kind of how that process works. And we can walk through the mechanics of that so you guys can talk about that. The role of directors, officers, emeritus, those kinds of things we outlined in here. Number of directors, we had a lot of discussion about this. I think we had all talked about this before. Now we have it as a minimum of 5, a maximum of 15, trying to keep this a board that's nimble, right? As we've all been on these boards that are like 40, 50 people, and it's challenging. One of the conversations we had at length was about elected officials. In the past, there had been a change to say that elected officials could not be on this board. With changing the structure, elected officials could be on this board. However, we talked about how that would function and whether that might actually be an impediment to the work of the board. We certainly want them to be supporters, we want to coordinate with them and those kinds of things, but I think that the board here needs to be independent of that type of political influence, particularly given the countywide scope, the fact that, you know, we may have an opportunity that comes that's best suited for a particular location, and not every location is going to be well suited. And if we had board members who were elected officials, that could get challenging. The other thing is, elected officials obviously serve at the public's pressure, so they change quite a lot in some cases. So we decided to retain that statement that elected officials shall not serve as directors. We had a lot of discussion about what a quorum is and what we need for voting, so I think we clarified that, and we'll go over those details. The election of officers, we clarified who the officers are, and we clarified the way that they would be nominated. We should talk about that. We kind of went through a bunch of different models about how to do that. We're such a small board, we were trying to avoid the circumstance where everybody's on everything. You know, just because then it kind of dilutes the purpose of having the different committees and things. A role of immediate first chair and second vice chair were eliminated. Again, we're such a small board that you'd end up with everybody being everything. You know, maybe when it's a larger, excuse me, a larger board, that will make sense. But for now, it didn't. Committee chairs, I like this. This was Connor's contribution, that the chair of a committee should be elected by the members of the committee. They're going to be the ones who are best suited to know who's the right person to run the committee.
And we see the committees as, you know, a team helping grow the organization in a direction, so that team should elect a captain, right?
Yeah,
so to speak. That's really the way we should be moving.
Exactly. Good analogy. And then we did add the ABO compliant finance and audit committee languages. So with that, if we want to kind of jump into the specifics of some of these things, and I would encourage you guys as we walk through this, just if you have comments or questions or whatever, just, you know, jump in. Connor, I know you had worked on the purposes to make sure that we were embracing all of the things that we want to do. Do you want to run through?
Yeah, and you know, we kept the purposes generally the same. The fundamental additions that we made were effectively, you know, look at number 3. It's you know, the black text is what exists today. The red text shows that, you know, we really are, our core competencies are site selection, the business attraction and expansion, and then increasingly, you know, real estate and site development efforts. When we look at programs like Fast New York and future structure opportunities like, you know, LDCs or quasi public-private partnerships, the organization could, you know, in effect one day look at, you know, site development opportunities to push the public purpose. So we really expanded upon our core competencies in number 3. And then number 6, we simply added other strategic partners. So, you know, that was specific to, you know, us working with trade associations and chambers. But we often work with, you know, Empire State Development. We work with local agencies, other LDCs and IDAs. So it's just larger strategic, the pattern for progress, right? So the strategic partner is just a broader catch-all to capture our collaborative vision.
Any comments on purposes?
No.
It seemed like we're in line there. Great.
So this is where
members,
yes.
right? So this, and this is all this blood is me. I apologize. I'm really sorry, but part of it was there was a lot of duplication. So a lot of the red line is eliminating duplication. But classes of members just kept it really simple. There's directors and there's investors. So that's it. We defined that directors of the corporation are those who serve as directors. They're the only class of voting members. So it just clarified who gets to vote. That's it. That was all it was. Investors, it's all the same language that we had. We made sure to make it crystal clear, no voting rights, and that there's no expectation of monetary or transactional return on investment. You're just a supporter. This red line, some of it was just duplication, so that a lot of these texts in the red line just show up in other locations. Some of the things did need to be eliminated for ABO compliance. For instance, voting by proxies is not permitted. So that was eliminated for that result. For that reason. And then there was some really complex things about election inspectors and lists of voting members that just with a board of our size and the fact that we're all local, there's nobody, you know, far away, there's no, it just didn't make sense to include that level of complexity, and it's not a requirement. So we eliminated those.
And then action by voting members without a meeting, cannot do that anyway.
Right,
so.
that's the same thing as a proxy, so we eliminated that. Management of the corporation, this also has some changes to it. we just clarified that the board of directors shall have officers as listed here. Nomination of directors. So this we should talk about. The governance committee should provide a slate of qualified candidates for the board of directors when seats on the board are open, and then which is the same as it was. Candidates will be presented to the board at a meeting immediately prior to the annual meeting. Individuals may hold any who hold any elected office will not be eligible to be directors.
And one of the you know, in the previous, you know, version of the Orange County Partnership, there was a nominating committee function, which was kind of housed in an executive as well. Governance under the new world order of ABO is that function, right? So you'll see both later in the document, executive committee becoming effectively governance committee, same with that nominating function.
So this, we had some discussion about the terms, and I think after we made some changes and then we actually went back to the original language. There was a little confusion about this. So directors are 3-year terms, except as modified. No director shall serve more than 2 consecutive terms, exclusive of time served as an officer. So if you are serving a term, you get elected as an officer, your 3-year term gets put essentially on hold. And then, which you're no longer an officer, you can resume your term. And we like that because it gives us some continuity, right, of leadership.
I appreciated that part of the.
Yeah, I think that's good. After serving 2 consecutive terms, directors are not eligible to stand for re-election to rejoin the board for at least a year. So, say you serve two terms, 6 years. You could be off the board for a year, and then you can be renominated if the governance committee believes that that's in the best interest of the organization. I think that helps with ensuring that we have new directors coming in, but that if there's someone who has an extraordinary contribution, we have the option to have them reconnect. This is important. It's interesting. This kid just came up on another board that I serve on. 60% attendance at board meetings during initial term in order to be renominated. This just kind of ensures engagement. I don't think it's really never been an issue here, but some other boards that probably all serve on have ghost board members who just don't. They're on there and they love having their name on the website.
Sure.
This is, as Connor said, this is going to be an active board that's going to be really, you know, I love the rowing the boat. You can't have a seat empty, right? So I like this. Do you guys have any reaction to that?
No, I'm on board on that one.
Yeah, that's usually a key component of a governance committee is making sure you have people that are engaged.
Exactly.
Or addressing those that aren't.
And then we did give some latitude here. Governance committee may make exceptions. So you could see where perhaps someone is on another board and we schedule our meetings and there's a conflict, right? But yet the person's contributions remain valid and solid, and maybe they're on a committee and they're doing the work of the committee and they just can't make the board meetings, or those kinds of things. So we gave some latitude just to have that in there. It's a safety valve. We clarified the position of directors emeritus. They're not a voting member for any purpose. And then the one thing we did add to this was, because we sort of have had to set it and forget it with the directors emeritus, was that every year the governance committee will review and make nominations to the full board for individuals they wish to appoint or reappoint to director emeriti. Selection will then be put to a vote of the full board, and they don't have a term per se. So we can have folks, if we want, they can just roll, or we can say, thank you so much for your service, and it's just flexibility. We just have additional language in here regarding the role of directors emeritus. That was in the prior. Basically, they're here as an acknowledgement of their commitment, and that's kind of the end of that. Number of directors, with this one we made very, very simple. Minimum of 5, no more than 15. Obviously, an exclusive of director emeriti, and at any point, we can always change the bylaws, right? This is, if we decide we need to make this a different number, but for right now, that just felt like the right vacancies, we added a little more framework around vacancies, because this was a little bit light. Vacancies may be filled by majority vote of the directors then in office at a properly convened meeting of the board following recommendations of the governance committee. There kind of wasn't language about how that happens.
Structure.
So, director elected to fill a vacancy shall be elected to the board for the unexpired term of his or her predecessor. After such service, a director that has filled a vacancy may be considered by the governance committee for a full term as a director, however, there's no obligation. So that, again, it's just more flexibility and provides some framework around it. Resignation or removal, this again, there just wasn't language regarding what happens. So, so basically if you become an elected official, you're automatically considered resigned. Because we have a policy that says no elected officials now. Voting, the voting board of directors may remove any director with or without cause in accordance with section 706 of the nonprofit corporations law. That was previously in this document. In the event that a member of the governance committee resigns or is removed, the remaining members of the governance committee should recommend to the chairperson or replacement director to join the committee. We just figured governance ends up being such an important committee that we should cover what happens if somebody, and it's a small committee, so what happens if someone leaves for some reason. In the event an officer resigns or is removed, the board shall elect a director to replace the officer for the remaining term of that officer that resigned or was removed in consideration of a recommendation of the president. So in this case, we figured the president is working with those officers on a hopefully very, very frequent basis, and that would be a good way to do this. After such service, a director that has filled the term of an officer that resigned or was removed may be considered by the board for full term of an officer. However, again, there's no obligation. So this is kind of aimed at continuity, but it's also providing some flexibility. Any reactions to that? Does that seem like a reasonable approach? Quorum of the directors, we just wanted to make it really clear what a quorum is. It's the majority of the total number of directors, so half plus one. So if we have, 10, you need 6 kind of thing. Action of the board, this was the same, board meetings. This is some language, there was all of that red line earlier in the document. This just picked up that we are required to conduct at a minimum an annual meeting for the election of officers and for the transaction of other such businesses properly may come, which shall be held each year in the county of Orange, in the state of New York, at a place and time of our determination. We are required to have at least, that's the only meeting we actually have to have, is an annual meeting. So we just wanted to capture that. Special meetings, again, a lot of this stuff is just in conformance with now being a public body, how those are called, order of business, conduct of meetings, chair shall provide, and then we just eliminated that second vice chairman because now that position doesn't exist anymore. Allowable methods of voting and appointment of the president of the corporation, these were removed from other sections. All votes must be in person. There's no proxy, so we just wanted to make that really clear. Appointment of the president, the board shall appoint a president. We need to do that. And then this is where we did make some changes here.
Yes.
Right. Officers, so the board shall elect a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer, who shall have such duties, powers, and functions as provided herein. The term is 1 year, and they may serve 1 successive year if re-elected. A vote to confirm officers shall be held at the annual meeting of the directors. A slate of officers shall be recommended by the chairpersons of the governance, audit, and finance committees working with the president for consideration of the board at least 30 days in advance of the meeting. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So the concept here was a 1-year term for the officers, and then provided everybody's engaged in doing their job, and the chairs of the committees should know that, because that's how it should work, then there's a good chance that it's just everyone gets renominated. On the other hand, if there's someone who, for whatever reason, is not kind of where they need to be, then it gives that flexibility to change the slate of officers. I like this. I think I was in another organization where we had a chair who really should have been the chair, and they were there for 2 years, and there was nothing we could do. We all just kind of sat there and waited for 2 years until.
And it's at least it's organizational accountability. You know,
It is.
again, like rowing in the direction, and if you're active on the board, if you're engaged, then this should not be a problem at all. But it is again an accountability piece that I think is critical.
I have no concerns on a one-year term piece. I've seen that in other organizations as well. I know historically we had kind of the succession within the officers, and now we don't, which I'm not saying is a problem one way or another. Just questions around why the limitation on a 2-year term. Just for
I guess it just, I know, well, so one of the things I know for me, because so for instance, right now I'm in the second year of my as chair of Pattern. It's a lot of work. And it's just like, I wouldn't, even though I love the organization, I wouldn't want to do another. I'm like, I need to go back and run my business. So part of it's just sort of an acknowledgement that 2 years is, but also, so 2 years to me feels like it's enough time to help accomplish something, but it's not so much time that you're dominating a board and kind of taking over, and it kind of gets made in your image.
So I'm thinking this less in terms of the role of chair, more in terms of things that, you know, the treasurer role, things where you may be limited in people that may have that kind of financial background.
Okay.
I've seen areas where it's like, oh, somebody kind of lives in that role for a long time because that's based on the skills of the
Because
board.
they're good at it.
Yeah, I totally hear you on the chair part because I've been in that same position
Yeah,
before.
it's rough. It is funny. I mean, in the past, I guess I'll just say this, right? Being treasurer here was almost a little bit of a punishment. So it's kind of like, move away from that, right? Like, I've always thought it was weird when there's organizations where there's like a whole bunch of bankers and none of them are the treasurer. It's like, it's kind of funny because that's like what they bring to the board is like all of this financial knowledge, but we're not going to have them do the work. I agree with you there. I don't know. Do you think?
Well, you know, the technical nature of the treasurer role, I think it could be fair to carve out, you know, an exemption on that term limit basis.
I have most of my questions are around that role because we've got new committees and there's nothing really tied to that. So just something to kind of think through.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting we have to change it. It's just something to.
And you know, in terms of the succession thing, we talked a little bit about that, and well, actually, we talked a lot about that. And I think one of the things we were thinking was if you had a strong committee leader that isn't an officer, it may very well make sense to make them right to like take them from a committee role. But if we do some kind of formal, I mean, in the way we were doing this, I think you were on the board you were an officer for like 8 years before you rolled up. Which is yes, you get to know the organization, but 8 years is like really, it's an epically long time to be committed.
Right.
You know.
Exclusive of your team.
Yeah.
The function of the finance committees is semi-similar to the role. I mean, the treasurer, the chair of the finance committee might be the treasurer, but if they're not, that should most certainly be, to your point, a very active relationship, especially around budget season and audit season.
Right. Because as we go, when we get further into this, right, you know, so we have, some organizations have finance and audit together. We've made them two different things. Kind of, I think
and
that
that's
was
because we have to. As well.
Yeah.
So the ABO likes finance and audit committee to be two separate entities, even though it does make sense to have them together. And then under the ABO guidelines, they like each committee meeting a minimum 2 times a year. So, you know, audit committee meets around audit season, finance is more very involved with budgets, and the adoption of the budget, and also the submission of the financial report for Paris. So they split it up. It's not necessarily efficient, but it is, you know, anyway.
Yeah. And again, I think it's an accountability issue. So
There's nothing that precludes an officer from being the chair of a committee then?
No. In fact, we were sort of thinking that that's probably for some of these, that's probably how this is going to work. Especially our board's just really small. Where are the extra people going to come from?
I like how this is laid out here.
A lot of debate and discussion about some of these topics.
Yeah.
And we went around the mulberry bush on, what we were trying to do was say, okay, well, let's come up with, let's sort of sensitivity analysis this, right? So we have this board, let's say we end up having a board of 9, right? Like, okay, so we have 4 officers, we have 3 standing committees. You know, you start going, you've got 9 people. how do you, the other thing is we are a great board with a lot of people with a lot to contribute, and we want to make sure that we're creating the circumstances where everybody's contribution is real, it's meaningful, Connor gets to engage with and use all of these wonderful resources of the board. That's why we're here, right? So we spend a lot of time on this stuff, but I think if you guys like this, I think that's good. And again, if we practice this for a few years and we're like, maybe we want to, right? I mean, that's I think one of the mistakes organizations make is they put their bylaws in place and then 40 years goes by and they never look at it. And half of the time, when they do go look at it, they go, oh, we're not actually acting in conformance with our bylaws. We evolved over time. I'm kind of a fan of, let's make sure every couple of years, maybe governance is looking at the bylaws and saying, hey, is this working? Do we need to change something? I just think it eliminates questions. It makes it easier for Connor to run the organization. It makes it easier for staff to understand how we're getting things done. That kind of thing. And board member expectations. Right? Like when you're a board member, what are we expecting you to do? How many boards have you guys been on where you get on the board and you have no clue what you're supposed to be doing for like 2 years? You're like, I do not know why I'm here. Other than I come to meetings and I like the organization. We're trying to kind of not have that be the case.
So I guess my question is specifically around the treasurer role because of kind of what their duties are outlined here, and then just how that ties into finance. I almost feel like they have to be a member of finance because of the duties that are kind of in there. If they're kind of directing the preparation of that stuff, if they're not on finance, I don't know how you do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so do we wanna, we can say the treasurer is de facto the chair of the finance committee. Do we wanna do that?
I've seen that elsewhere.
Is everybody okay with that?
Very, very
I'm
clean.
okay with that.
Very clean.
And then the other question to Ryan's point is, do we wanna say that they can serve longer than 2 years?
I don't know if you need to. It's just one of those, again, small board, it probably isn't a bad thing to kind of move that around, particularly given the history of it here.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
But can you leave it open at the discretion?
Yeah, there may be a
Because the committees, so if
dispensation.
the treasurer is going to be the de facto chair of finance, well, if they're the de facto, finance also, the committee itself votes their chair democratically. So I guess it could be, again, at the discretion of the committee, you could reappoint chair of finance who's de facto treasurer.
Yeah, do you wanna, so I guess that's the question, right? Which
Yep.
direction do you want it to go?
Yeah.
Do you want it to come from the election of the treasurer, or do you want it to be an outgrowth of finance gets together, picks their chair, and then that chair is treasurer?
The latter.
The latter. Okay, so finance is running the show, picking the chair.
Yep.
Okay, all right, I like that. Okay, cool. All right.
And you'll see here, so again, the executive committee is not a function of ABO. The governance committee is truly that function. So you'll see we molded the two committees, so to speak.
Yeah.
Traditional governance functions under the recommended, public authority law, but also functions of the executive committee in the sense, we said the governance committee shall be made up of a minimum of 3 but no more than 4, whose function is to evaluate recommendations regarding the bylaws, the rules and regulations of the corporation, may make recommendations regarding qualified candidates. There's that nomination function. Inform board members of organizational best practices, which is important as stewards of the organization. That governance committee is helping drive the charge here. Update on trends, and then again in vein with the executive committee's previous functions, evaluate the performance of CEO and participate in organizational strategy as needed. So it kind of molds both committees, but also is complying under the public authority law. And keep in mind, there's no, the ABO kind of gives model charter guidance, but they don't tell you how to write your bylaws.
Right.
Your bylaws are meant to fit the organization, but you have to notice your meetings, right? You have to have open meetings. You have to have those minimum 3 committees, but they don't really dictate the way you run the organization. The bylaws are going to be different for every single organization, and functionally, but the ABO language will be uniform in most parts of the organization.
What about written policy, such as like conflict of interest and stuff like that that's required by the ABO? That would fall under the governance.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, but they wouldn't be necessarily writing it, the organization would be writing, but we may be reviewing it and then recommending it to the
That's-
board for approval.
So I think that's covered here. It says regarding the bylaws and rules and regulations of
Yeah.
the corporation.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of,
Yeah.
I would read that as the catch-all.
It's in
Right, so
Yeah.
we would develop a policy similar to this practice,
Right.
Yeah.
governance would review it and recommend it to full board
Yeah.
for adoption.
Yeah.
And then similarly, you'll see the audit committee, now this is directly taken from the ABO's model committee charter guidance.
Yeah.
And this is standard, right? The audit committee's, critical function, so it's 3 members, but they're critical in helping file the annual report for Paris and then compiling audited financial statements, but also selecting the auditor, independent accounting firm. They of course need to be familiar with corporate financial and accounting trends. They monitor the independence of an auditing firm with respect to conflicts of interest. And then it also further goes through the process of, what does the public accounting process look like. So the audit committee shall require that each independent public accounting firm that performs the audit shall submit the report to the audit committee. All of course, critical accounting policies must be used. All alternative treatments of financial information with generally accepted accounting principles that have been discussed with management officials of the agency. So they're giving us the management report that's coming to the audit committee. And then further information with respect to the audit will go through this committee. And that is critical for the board, that committee again recommending to the full board to submit the audit report to Paris.
The one thing kind of we gotta do is this uses the word agency and we call it corporation. So we gotta go find agency and scrub it out. It's corporation, so we don't confuse
Fourth
the
paragraph.
terms.
It's in
Yeah.
there, it's in there a few times.
Yeah, it is. So we do a search and destroy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then finance, Connor, also, right?
Yep, we will change any mention of agency to corporation.
This one says authority. So,
Yeah,
because again, this is the cut and paste kind
right.
of operation. But then again, Connor, right, this is really ABO guidance.
Yes.
Yeah, so my only question here was, there was a little bit of gray with how some of the bullets are written in terms of where audit meets up with finance, and just, because it kind of talks about, like, make recommendation, like, they're not recommending the audit piece, so it's like, kind of irrespective of that, but it's kind of written more broadly, so it's like, all right, the two shall kind of really go up right against each other, but not overlap.
Yeah. And the finance, I think that the tenor of finance is more so focused on, your investment policy, but also with respect to, and again, they'll have that treasurer function, which I love, but also I think finance will play a more robust role in the budgeting process, no doubt. And the audit's kind of main function will be, review the audited financial statements, keeping us on track in that regard as well.
That's
Trying to-
rings true, it's the budget and it's, how is our investments, meeting with those and do we need to make changes to how we hold things,
Absolutely.
Okay, so Ryan, do you feel that we need to change, other than updating authority, do we need to change anything in finance committee, or? So I think you're probably reading the meet with, and request information from staff, independent auditors, and advisors, outside
Just
counsel
talks
if
about it
necessary.
I think it's more the first bullet, it says, appointment and compensation of, the last clause in the first bullet talks about, oversee the, maybe it's just maybe I'm overreading that.
Well, I'm wondering, because it talks about underwriting, and we're not doing that,
yeah.
right? So I'm just wondering if this is, again, kind of a victim of trying to sort of do masters.
Yes. I think it might be. And oversee work. I'm okay with removing the underwriting and then keeping the oversee the work performed by the city commissioners.
I think I may just be overreading and just, I think it's clear what they're doing with external counsel is more on the investment side, more than anything else is on the audit side, so.
Right.
Okay, So remove underwriting?
Yes.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
take that out, cause we're not,
So,
the rest of it seems like it's fairly open, so it's not,
Yeah, because they need to have the ability to meet with the auditors if there's a concern around the finances.
correct. That's part of that checks and balances, so. Okay,
okay, great.
cool.
And then we also maintain the fact that, you know, the chairperson, with the approval of the board, may establish committees to perform such duties from time to time that may be required. And then each committee should serve at the pleasure of the chair in this case. And that's, you know, if we need to create a, you know, site development committee, a strategic planning committee, whatever it may be, we want to maintain that optionality to be nimble.
Good.
From a terming perspective, should we call them ad hoc?
Ad hoc,
committees?
yeah, I think so, I was just thinking the same thing. I think somewhere else in here I used the ad hoc language, so that makes sense.
And you'll notice following, okay, we'll change that to ad hoc. We also removed the Alliance for Balance Growth. And not because we're gonna remove its function, but because I think it had a degree of formality here that it didn't need to. You know, it's an informal program of the Orange County Partnership where we often have, you know, we'll have two people who help guide programming. You know, the beauty of the ABG is it's a program, it's nimble, it's quick, we're able to respond to the needs and current trends in the planning world. So to have it so ingrained in our bylaws, especially for, you know, they don't have a board seat, it's not really a board function,
Right.
it's just for
Right.
efficiency's sake, something like that.
Yeah, we talked about it a bit, and we were like, well, you know, if you think about all of the things we sort of do and are known for, it's not like we don't have like a QPM committee, we don't have a, right, I mean, we might end up with like having an annual dinner committee or, you know, to organize that, but they're still just sort of administrative functions, they're not at a level of committee like finance or governance or whatever, so we talked about it and we said, you know, they sort of guide programming, and many times they're not members of the board, they're investors, they're just supporters, that kind of thing, so we didn't want it to be confusing.
Right.
I do remember long ago, this actually came up in Montgomery, there was a question about, you know, well, what is, you know, what is the Alliance, and what, you know, do they spend money, do they, I'm like, no, so it's like, okay, we need to, you know,
Right.
clarify.
There's a degree of formality because
Yeah.
we have to have.
Yeah, what they are, so. This is just more duplication, we have a lot of duplication in here, there's our beautiful seal, let's see, conflicts between the certificate of incorporation and bylaws, certificate of incorporation governs, budgets and fiscal year, president shall cause a budget to be proposed, annually to the board, I mean, so really this, I don't know if we need to change this, cause really it's gonna go through finance, right?
Yeah.
Do we need, maybe we need to change it.
Budget, yeah,
So the president should be proposing the budget, but submit to the finance committee
Yeah.
yes.
for review, and then the finance committee is gonna
Ultimate
nominate,
recommendation to the board.
recommend to the board. Okay, last one, board may make changes, that one's fine, disbursements, this is expenses, right, I think this is all regular, all checks require 2 signatures,
Yes.
Two more signatories.
right now I'm one of them,
Okay, so
Yeah.
the treasurer's one.
Yeah, treasurer.
Treasurer.
and chair.
Okay.
Right. Bylaws may be amended by vote of the directors, 2/3, so you need a supermajority to do it, at least 7 days before the meeting, and this was all kind of what was in there before. That's it. Anything, anybody, I think the biggest changes here are kind of restructuring officers and committees, making it really clear how people are nominated, and sort of, it's a bunch of process changes.
Yeah, makes sense.
And again, I would encourage us not to be like, okay, we did this and now we just walk away from it, because we are kind of a new, even though we're an older organization, we're sort of a new organization, right? And that we consider this, you know, as our guiding document for a period, and maybe what it is in a couple of years we sit down and we look at it and we say, is this working? Is there something here that's not working? I think we've tried to build, we have structure, but we've tried to build a little bit of flexibility into it to take into account our Brave New World.
Mhm.
When will the nominations for the committees take place, and also the officers?
So the
Because other than Melissa,
officers-
we currently don't have any structured officers, right?
We do have.
We do,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's secretary, yeah, 'cause
Secretary and treasurer.
Susan is secretary,
And I'm
Mary
treasurer.
Beth is treasurer. We just don't have a vice chair at the moment.
So, let's see.
And theoretically, we could have any board meeting, just with, but see, Cassie, to your point, once we kind of ratify these, we should have a discussion at the board meeting around membership of those committees. We talked about it at the last meeting in terms of finance and governance, but we didn't cover audit, and then we should probably just revisit those.
So it says, okay, so
I think
what
we-
this says, if you
we
go
did
to
appointments for
9,
Audit, yeah, finance and audit, yeah.
Yes.
yeah, we did.
Yeah,
We did governance, finance, and
Separately,
audit.
separately,
Okay,
yeah.
alright.
Yeah.
And some folks are doing double duty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like,
both.
we're just gonna have to.
Right, exactly. yeah.
So if you go to, if you're looking at the red line, if you go to the bottom of page 9, top of page 10. Bottom of page 9 says officer election term, right, so chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer shall serve duties. Term is 1 year, 1 successive year, a vote. Then it says, slate of officers shall be recommended by the chairpersons of government audits and finance, working with the president in consideration at least 30 days in advance of the meeting in which they will be nominated. So it could really, so it doesn't say it's the annual meeting, it could be any meeting.
Right.
I agree.
So it could be the meeting in, well, we don't have 30 days to May 20th,
Mhm.
but,
The sentence before that, vote to confirm shall be held at the annual meeting.
oh, she'll be handled at the annual meeting. So
But-
that's the, so it's 30 days before
but-
the annual meeting.
Yeah, basically you gotta notice it a month ahead of time, okay, this is the
Yeah.
the slate we are proposing for officers and for board,
Yep.
at the next meeting is when we will take action on
So
Okay.
right now, we have the officers we have
Yeah.
until we get to the end of the
it.
year.
So we have the ability to cover the expired term of the vacant vice chair role.
Right,
Yes.
right.
And I'm okay with that, so I think the next move, assuming this gets ratified, you know, at the 20th meeting, would be then to
Provided
elect the committee chairs.
Provided we provide it next week,
Yes, 7
so
days.
we have 7 days.
7 days in advance.
Yes. So, we would be the election of the committee chairs, which then I think, we'll see the process, you know, start to codify.
Yeah, I think so too. Does that answer your
Yep.
question? Yep. Yep. Thank you for asking that though. I knew we covered it in here somewhere. So our our process, right, we had the document, Connor had done some work on it, we had 2 or 3 calls to talk about it. I spent some time and I realized that we had a lot of duplication and there was a lot of language that seemed like it was applicable to a different type of organization than ours, like one that was much larger with a broader voting group with a smaller group of directors, and we just don't have that structure. So that was where I finally said to Connor, do you want me just to, I'll be happy to bleed all over this thing. So I'm glad. So, okay, any other comments or questions?
I'm good with this.
Okay.
I think this is,
All right.
you know,
So we're gonna make
well
a
drafted.
couple changes,
Yes,
right?
yes.
We're gonna we're gonna destroy agency and authority, right? And we're gonna add ad hoc to committees, and then we're gonna clarify that treasurer is an outgrowth of the election of the chair of finance.
Yes.
And we're going to add to budgets and fiscal year that the president shall propose a draft budget to finance, who shall recommend it to the board.
Yes.
Just so that all our languages.
And remove underwriting.
And we're gonna remove underwriting, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so who's,
I think we need a motion.
okay,
Motion, I think the motion then would be to recommend this version of the bylaws, you know, with respect to including the changes that were just addressed, to the full board for ratification on May 20th.
I'll make that motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, excellent.
Off to the full board it goes.
Who's editing?
Oh, I didn't, you wanna adjourn?
Yes, so I guess we need a motion to adjourn, so
We need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
we're on fire.
A second.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.